There you go. Now we're recording.
Now we're recording. That sounds right when I made the recording with Jim.
Yeah, you have to confirm that.
I think we're recording now. He got a big kick out of that. But that was a great experience to be able to go through all the old, my list of photographs
Yeah.
and look at them and really get, I learned a lot about my history I didn't know till I talked to him about it.
Yeah. Well, he had pieces of yours
Yeah,
that you needed.
he did, and so it was a great time. And so now here I am with Deanna, uh, trying to get more information to the family.
I do. I wanted to. You said you'd wanted to. You'd told me your story, and I wanted the rest to record it, so then so that they all get the message further out.
Okay, so do you want to start with on the farm?
Yeah.
Okay, we lived on my grandfather's farm in Nebraska for several years. Then we moved to the farm that my father had leased from the University of Nebraska, and I don't recall much of that move.
Do you remember your grandfather, or was he there on the farm with you?
Well, the farm was my great grandfather.
Oh.
But my grandfather, I spent time with him, Grandfather Weber. By that time, he had retired, and he liked to go in to the tavern and play dominoes. And,
How old were you?
I guess I must have been around 4 or 5 when I would go in with him. He would buy me a Coke, and I could drink that and be happy while he played dominoes. I didn't bug him.
Is that August Weber?
Yes.
Okay.
That's August Weber, and so they. But he was the one. He and I forget who. When I was born, they were trying to talk my mother into naming me Adolf. She wouldn't have it.
Yeah, I'm glad she didn't.
And when World War II came about, Adolf was a terrible name because that was Hitler's. Anyway, the farm, I love playing around out there, but it was so far away that I didn't have close friends that I could see every day. And I had a cousin several miles away that occasionally I saw him, but so I learned to play by myself.
Where was Jim?
I don't know. He was busy.
Oh.
My father had asthma and was sick in bed for several months, and so he made an agreement with my brother Jim. If he'd do the chores and milk the cows, he'd buy him a new rifle, and so that worked out. And part of the work was having to use the team of horses and the team of mules. The horses were Barney and Bill, and the mules were Will and Molly. And he came in practically in tears to his father, said, "Dad, I can't get the bridle on Molly. She throws her head and won't let me put the bridle on." And my father said, "Well, son, you know what a single tree is?" He said, "Yeah, and that's a bar about yay long. It's round. It's oak, and maybe about yay big round." And he said, "Okay, take the bridle and the single tree, and when you reach the bridle up to her head, she throws her head, hit her between the ears as hard as you can. He never had any more trouble putting a bridle on the Molly. Bad mule. Now you're a good mule.
Yeah.
And so it really then my birthday, August 28th, is when I turned 5, and a mother could arrange to get a child started in school at 5 in first grade. So I just barely turned 5, and I was in first grade in the school, and it was maybe half, 3/4 a mile away. So it was my role to walk to school every day, and whatever I was supposed to do, I did it.
Yeah.
And then one morning, we had, I don't know, 5 or 6 inches of snow on the ground. And walking to school, there was rabbit tracks in the snow, and it was a clear, bright day. And I was having fun chasing rabbit tracks and walking along, and I was digging a trench in the snow across the road, thinking, well, the car would come along and hit that drop in that, which is ridiculous. But anyhow, that's what I was thinking.
Because I don't live in the ground.
Well, no, I was thinking of the car driving on top of the snow and then fall down in that ditch that I dug. So I got to school by first recess at 10 o'clock. And unfortunately, as I've told many people, my mother could watch me from the house. And she really got angry and got in the car. She was going to go get me. She got stuck in the driveway before she got off of the farm. And so when I got home, I got my first and only spanking. And she burned my bottom good.
She must have been mad the whole time watching you.
That's it, She was mad watching me, and then mad and getting stuck in the snow, and she just sat and stewed. And I learned, and the things that, I had to wear long underwear and wear coveralls and a winter coat. And then in the springtime, I thought, Mom, I don't need long underwear now. It's not that cold. All right, son, if that's what you want to do. I like to froze my butt off walking to school. I decided, maybe I better not stay with the long underwear. And I was always looking forward to the time that I could be a big person and wear overalls instead of coveralls. Thinking back, why we had only water we had in the house was what we carried in by bucket, and the well was on the other side of the driveway from the house, so that was and sometimes the wind wasn't blowing, so you had to pump it by hand. So that's, bring it over. And I don't remember bathing. I'm sure we did.
And like little buckets or something?
We had a big tub, and that's where she did their laundry and that. So I can understand that coveralls made it simpler. You didn't have to wash in a shirt and pants and all that. Just one deal and get it washed. And we had a big wood-burning stove in the kitchen, and that's where we cooked all the meals, ate the meals, and in the living room we had a big coal-burning pot-bellied stove, and it really put out the heat. And that's all the heat we had in that house during the winter.
Yeah.
And it was a 2-story house, and we had one bedroom for my brother and I, and one bedroom for my mother and father. And there was a vent in the floor where you could stand on. It was right over the coal-burning stove. So I can remember standing on that vent trying to get warm enough to go in and get in the cold sheets and curl up in a little ball and manage to get warmed up. But that was vaguely remember getting electricity into the house. And then we got a telephone, one of those old wooden ones that you pick the receiver up and crank the handle, and then the operator would answer and says, and you tell her, I want to talk to Charlie Doofus or whatever,
Yeah.
and she would plug you into that and you could talk to him.
But you were too young to use the phone, right?
Oh yeah, I never got to use it.
No,
No, it was something I could see and
wanted to use.
Yes. And one of the funny things that I remember was the yard was all fenced in, and also up on one end it included the garden. So Mother didn't want any chickens in the yard because they get in the garden. And she told me, Wayne, go chase those chickens out of the yard. Okay. So I went out there, shoo, chickens, shoo, shoo. And one rooster took a look at me, and he started after me. And I took off running, and I lost my shoes. I had a little bucket that I was carrying out there, and I threw the bucket, and I made it to the porch before he got me. And I guess Mother went out and chased the chickens out of the yard. And then another time, I was playing by myself. For some reason, I was playing with my father's spur, and I don't know what or why. But anyhow, my father came in. He was getting ready to go out and ride and check on cattle. And, Wayne, where's my spur? I don't know. And he had the quirt in his hand. He whipped me across the butt 2 or 3 times ago. Find that spur. Boy, I took off. I finally found it and brought it back to him. Those are the only times I can remember either one of them hitting me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
But was your father sick most of the time while you were there, or at the farmhouse?
He was sick part of the time, before we left. That's the reason we left the farm. That was during World War II, and gas was rationed. You had to have a government stamp to be able to buy gas. And he bought the last Ford sold in Nemaha County from his cousin Pullman, and that was a 42 Ford, big flathead 8. And he managed to borrow enough gas stamps from friends and family, and he and Mom drove down to Texas. And he was thinking that he could find some place where it would suit his health better.
Did you have family in Texas?
No.
Just picked Texas.
It was south. He wanted to get far south as he could, see if he could get in a drier, warmer climate. And while he was down there, he bought about, I think, 100 head of cattle. And he had them shipped up to Nebraska. And I don't remember the details on that, but he had quite a bit of pasture there, and he put them on the pasture, and they really did good. He got them up to the point where they'd be good feedlot cattle, and then he sold them and shipped him up to Chicago and sold him there. And when he was growing up, after he graduated from high school, he was living at home with his father, and he was trading in cattle. He would go out and buy cattle from neighbors and whatever, and drive them home by horse. And when he'd get enough of them together, why, then he'd ship them to Chicago to sell them in Chicago.
Wow.
And he was. I remember Jim telling me that he was an expert with a bullwhip. He could practically pop the neck off a beer bottle.
Wow.
I mean, he was. I would never try to use a bullwhip while I was on a horse. The horse would really probably buck me off if I hit him with a. But he was very competent. He and his father bought and sold cattle, and so when a farm sale was when a farmer sold all of his accumulations on the farm, equipment and grain and hay and whatever he had. He sold all of that at an auction, and that was a big social event for everybody around would come, and women would get together and cook food, and it was a big social event to go to a farm sale, and the auctioneer would be there all day selling off items. And I remember because there were other kids came in, and we were being kids, running, playing, get into stuff, and my father had bought a travel trailer and had the old 42 Ford fixed up to pull it. And I thought it was mine. It was a collie dog that belonged to the farm, and his name was Rover. And then all of a sudden, my father and mother came home with a little puppy, black and white, called him Butch. And I was all enthused with Butch. And then the next thing I knew, Rover disappeared. And I didn't think too much about it. And looking back, I think my father knew that I would have trouble leaving the farm and leaving Rover behind.
Yeah.
So he got Butch, and Butch became the second dog, and Rover, I don't know if my father killed him or what, but he was always planning on how to keep things smooth. And there was one time we went to a Christmas service at a church in Brock, I think. But otherwise, there was never any talk about church or God. They showed a lot of love and caring for each other and for the children, but there was no family Bible, nothing like that. And so and that kind of surprised me, because I guess my mother was an O'Hara and Irish, and she just if they were Catholic, she never got involved in it.
Huh.
And anyway, we left the farm and moved in town with a trailer for a week or so, and then we headed south.
How were you? More around 6 or 7 now?
I was 9.
Oh, 9.
Yes, because then between 9 and 10, because I started in the 5th grade. I finished the 4th grade in Cherry Grove School District. The little one-room country school I went to was Cherry Grove, and it had a big pot-bellied stove, and it was a teacher's job to come in and get that fired up and start warming the schoolroom up before, and she had a desk kind of up on the platform and a stage in the front of the school, and there was a long bench set in front of her, and so she would teach different classes at different times, different ages. You know, I can't remember now, as you know, whether it was sixth grade that they went to Brock to that they had the school in Brock.
Did you and Jim go to school together then?
No, because you know he was 7 years older than I was.
Yeah.
So we never went to school, and so it was the road there by the little one room country school was graveled. That road was graveled, and so sometimes when it was really getting bad, muddy and bad weather, Dad would leave his car up by the school and ride a horse up to get it and go on into town. And I remember my brother, he rode the bus out and he saw the horse. Oh, there's my horse. I can ride that home. He rode it home. My mother says, "That's for your father when he brings his car back. You ride that horse back, tie him up, and then walk back here." And so that was, we headed down to Laredo, Texas. That's where my father wanted to go, was Laredo, Texas. Hot and dry. Good for
just because he was down south, or was there a reason?
It was for his asthma. And I remember he took me out to the ranch where he had bought cattle, and it was exactly like you see in the movie with the chuck wagon. The back drops down and like a table, and all the equipment in there on shelves, and big campfire with pots and kettles, and the rancher and my dad were talking, and the rancher said, "Son, get on that horse and go bring that steer in out there in the bush." And Dad said, "Oh, he'll never get that done. He doesn't know." He said, "Oh, that's okay, son. All you got to do is stick on that horse." And so we went out there, and that horse brought him into the deal by itself. All I do was trying to hang on. And so, but living in Laredo, that trailer was able to hook some electricity on, but and apparently they had, I don't know, that must have had some type of sewage. There was a kitchen sink in the middle of the trailer, and in the kitchen where Mother could cook and wash dishes, and the refrigerator was truly an ice box, and the iceman would come by and put a chunk of ice up at the top of the refrigerator, and that kept everything chilled. And as the ice melted, it dropped down, water dropped into a pan underneath, and milk was delivered in bottles, and there was no such thing as homogenized milk back then. So there was always a big deal of cream at the top of the bottle. And so that I went to school in the 5th grade in Laredo, and as I've told everybody, there was a girl and I were the only white children in that class. They were all Mexicans.
Wow.
And most of them treated me well. I got along with most of them, but one little kid didn't like me. And he said, he turned around and talked to me in Spanish. And of course, I had no idea what he was saying. another little kid sitting there saying, "Oh, he's cussing you out." And finally that kid comes up and says, "You get your gang, I'll get my gang. We'll meet after school." I looked around. There's no gang here for me. uh, so my response to that was, when school was out, run as fast as I could. So I learned later from my brother that my father was thinking of buying a bowling alley or something there in Laredo, but I think that was, my brother had graduated from high school in Brock, Nebraska. He came down and we moved to San Antonio for the summer.
So Jim didn't move with you when you went down?
He no,
stayed?
He lived with my aunt and uncle, John and Wavy Fuller. That Wavy was my mom's sister. And they moved in the farm that we left, and then they later moved over to the neighbor's farm and was living there. But Jim was living with them to finish high school.
Oh.
So he got down there. He thought he wanted to be a doctor, and so looking back, I realized how hard my parents worked to get us educated. You know, my dad moved to Austin, moved the trailer up to Austin, and it had one bed in it, and then the sofa that folded down into a bed. That's my brother and I slept on the sofa, and so my father found this little shop that was a block off the main street by the university, and at that time there was very little pet food in grocery stores. That wasn't so he decided that he could sell dog food. He bought, I don't know where he got the idea, but he would buy horses, have them slaughtered and boned out, and he bought from Army surplus these big cans, tubs, and they would put the boned meat into the tubs, and he had a trailer, and he'd go down and load them all up and bring them back up to the store, and the store had a cooler and had it was like you see in the old time the meat display for a meat market.
Yeah, yeah.
And so
like a butcher's.
Yeah, and so he had done butchering at home and cutting meat as part of the family. So he was slicing and grinding, and so you could buy fresh horse meat, sliced or ground, and that little dog Butch, he got a half a pound of horse meat every day. That's what we eventually had left Austin, and Butch starved to death before he could learn to eat something besides horse meat.
he was used to it.
Yeah.
So was Jim going to college there, or is that why you were there?
He went the first year of college, and he was practically flunking out.
Well, and now I realize you guys were pretty big and tall, and sleeping on that one couch together was.
No, I was a little bitty guy. It was in high school before I started getting any height.
Oh, okay, that's true.
And if you look at the family pictures, there's Jim and Dad and Mom, and there's Wayne. So Jim was about to flunk out, and so we moved to Odessa, Texas. Dad moved to Odessa, Texas. I don't know why, but he did, and we lived there for a while, and then he moved to Roswell, New Mexico, and Roswell had tremendous irrigation at the time, and they grew cotton and alfalfa, and they rotate the crops. Alfalfa enriches the ground. It's helped build nutrients in the soil, and so he saw them with quite a few fields of alfalfa, and I guess decided that custom baling would be a good thing. Of course, before that, he talked to the dealer in the Packard agency, and I guess he talked himself into a job as a used car salesman. And he was good at.
Yeah.
So he was able to park his trailer free on the used car lot, and right across the street or across the alley from the car lot was a trailer park, and so we were able to use that. They had one big bathroom for all the residents in the park, so we were able to go over and use that, and there seemed like they had some water he could hook into, and so there we go. He then bought the hay baler and a John Deere tractor, and he had a trailer made, and I guess that was all his idea, that as the bales were coming out of the baler, you take them and stack them at the back of the trailer, and it had a trip on the front and the weight on the back. If you dropped it off, the stacked bales would slide off of the trailer, and so that was my brother's job, to stack the bales, and because that way, if they were selling the hay, a truck can come in and they were there and throw the bales up on the truck. No mechanical loader. And there, as the bales were coming out, there was a seat there. And at times it was my job to sit there and pull on the strings and make sure they were tied tight. It was really, really a lot of fun to sit there with all the snow and with all the blowing. That was my bird clock behind you.
I was like, what is that?
I had a friend give me that clock, and Joe said, "Weber, put that in your office. I don't want to hear that every day."
It sounds real.
It has all different kinds of birds up there. Anyway, we was doing baling. Dad was selling used cars and baler, and then he got the idea that there, several miles out of the border limit, was an air base, and airmen would come walking down, and he found this lot that he could lease, I guess, and he drove all around New Mexico and Arizona. Maybe, I don't know how far or where he went, but he got plans to build a miniature golf course, and a motel was putting new carpet in all the rooms, and he bought all the used carpet, and they laid out the plans for the golf course and had wood on the rails and cement and carpet, and somehow he found putters and charged, I think, 50 cents a game, come in, and course, if we could find a couple of girls that were willing to play, they play free, and the airmen coming by with let's play golf. So it was. Looking back, he was a real entrepreneur, coming up with
So was he
different.
doing that and the car sales and the bailing all at the same time?
Yeah, yeah, and
So did you work the golf thing?
yeah, at times, yeah, and
Was Jim going to school there?
no,
Okay.
he was working there, and he decided to go back to school, and they had this one old Chevy. This couple was wanting to try it out, so he sat in the back seat and let them drive. And the road came down, angled across the railroad track, and then like that. And when they miscalculated, and they went down the railroad tracks, and he fell forward and hit his face and started nose bleeding. And he got home. That incident threw the front end out of line of that car, and people still called that car Spraddle Legs because. And but when he got home, he couldn't stop the bleeding. They took him to the hospital, and he never came out of the hospital.
Oh.
And I never saw a doctor's diagnosis, but in my mind, he must have had cancer. And because I don't know, he was always a very thin man and never weighed that much, but he dropped down to practically skin and bones.
Oh.
And there he was in the hospital for I don't remember, 4 or 5, 6 months, and then he died in the hospital.
Was your mother taking care of all the businesses, or what was that?
Well, between she and my brother were doing that, and so I was.
Because you had still been going to school in Roswell, right?
Yeah. And then we had to take Dad up to Barry in Nebraska, and there was an airman that loaned us his car. He had a new Chrysler special one. He was also a homosexual, and he was one that sexually molested me. And
But you didn't tell anybody.
no.
Oh.
And then there was one time in the bathroom at the park, I had to go over there to pee or whatever. There was a man who says, "Let me show you something here. Stand up here on this toilet. I'll show you something. You'll really like it. It's nice." So I stood on the toilet, and he pulled my pants down and started sucking on my penis.
But that was a different guy than the other guy.
Yeah. So anyhow, sexual molesting by homosexuals created a lot of confusion in my mind about what all. But anyhow, after Dad died, somehow Joe got a job at the local dairy to take care of the books and do the scale.
In Texas or back in
Roswell.
Roswell.
Clardy's Dairy. And they were, I don't know how many head, they must have been milking close to 200 head a day. And so they pulled our trailer out and parked it right beside the scale house and the scales. And
Where's Jim then? Did Jim go off to the...
Jim went back to school.
Okay. But when did he go in the military?
After he graduated.
Okay.
Jim, after
you graduated.
He was in ROTC.
Okay.
Air Force ROTC. And with that, when you graduate, you became a second lieutenant. That was the lowest grade of officer. And so he got married before he graduated.
But was he living with you on the dairy? Or was it just you and your mom?
Just my mother and I. And so I could ride the bus to school and lived on that dairy farm. And the owner, Carl Clardy, his daughter, gave a horse to her that was part Tennessee Walker and I forget what, but it was a nice little filly mare, and so I could ride that anytime I wanted, and so I did that. Then Carl Clardy, he always treated us very good, you know. How I never knew how they made arrangements to hire mom, or bring that trailer out. But he came while I was in high school. Before I graduated, they had a fair in Roswell called Southeastern New Mexico State Fair. And it was a big fair. So Farrell said, "Wayne, how would you like to show cattle in the fair?" Oh, wow, yeah. So they picked out the ones that were going to, they had a calf or two and yearlings, and they didn't put any senior, you know, full cows, because they were milking, but it was, so it was my job to halter break them and clean them, train them, and they hauled them down. And so I had to stay at the fair all week.
Oh, wow.
And I went to school, told them what I was doing, and I was going to have to stay in the fair. So I got permission to skip school. And so they did that for their, to publicize
the dairy.
And so it
because I can always trim off pieces.
There we go. We're
back again.
Well, you know, my father died when I was 15, and I had real trouble trying to cope with that. My mother, looking back, I realized how strong she was. She always seemed to have everything under control, and I never saw her getting moaning or crying, or she was just strong and steady. Also, there in Roswell, it was fairly close to the First Christian Church, and I got involved with the youth group. I started in Cairo, which was junior high group, and then the CYF, the Christian Youth Fellowship. I really got excited. I loved to get down there every Sunday afternoon, and we playing volleyball or games, doing activities. That's really what got me started in church and started working with that, and became an important part to me. Went to a church camp up in the mountains near Albuquerque one summer. So it helped me stabilize my life. And of course, in Roswell, I was able to get my driver's license when I turned 15. I took a written test. I don't remember even taking a driving test. And it was very quick. Of course, we were living out on the dairy, and my mother had that, and then she had a night job working in a concession stand at the drive-in. She did that every night. She was always doing extra jobs, working to make ends meet. And I never heard her say anything to me about, Wayne, we have trouble with money.
Did she pay for gym and your college?
I don't remember that. Jim got married, I think in my senior year in high school. He got married, and we went over to Austin for the wedding. And there's a picture of me and Mother and Aunt Bernice that is in somewhere in that group. And of course, Virginia's uncle was head of the state Department of Safety. He was head of all the government police, so to speak, and so he was. They were well into the social scene, and they got married at their house, and it was. A thing I remember is that Jim was trying to get ready, and he hadn't bought any shoes for the wedding. So I had to give him my shoes. I had a set of new shoes and a sport coat and pants. Actually, before that, the only thing I had were shirts and Levi's and boots. So I don't remember what I wore, but to the wedding. But Jim had my shoes. He never gave them back. So it was, and then I graduated from high school when I was 16.
In Roswell?
In Roswell. And I was on the boxing team, learning to box, and the first year I was fighting in the 136 weight class, and the second year I was fighting in the 147, and both of those weights had an outstanding, really great boxer. And in the 145, Homer Cleese, he was able to go into the National Golden Gloves and was lost in the final fight. And he was tough. So I had no chance of getting in there. Then in my senior year, Coach put me in the 155 class. And I don't think I even weighed 150 at the time. I was 6'1". There's a picture of me with, and I think somebody mentioned it looked like I was all ears and feet.
Yeah.
And so, anyhow, and it was unusual for a high school to have a boxing team. But the one coach, the assistant football coach, loved boxing, and he was the one that got it all started and kept it going. And he was always upbeat. He was going strong. He was kind of a little Irish type, and just so when we came to weigh in, you step on the scales, you couldn't be within a certain weight. And he'd hand me some big rolls of tape and bottles of water and said, "Here, Weber, you'll pace." And so we had 3 matches, and I fought 3 guys, and the only consolation I had that the other guy won on a split decision.
Oh.
So that was how. And then I had 1 fight in the Golden Gloves, and I lost that by split decision. But I was in fact, yeah, I didn't. The thing I learned is that you can take a punch and just keep on going.
Yeah.
And that was a valuable lesson for me. The thing I didn't learn is how to train and get strong and physically fit. But back in those days, weightlifting was not done in the school, and it was just all physical exercise. So anyway, we got through high school, and my mother was so strong and supportive that I had to go to college. And so I went to New Mexico A&M. While I was living on the dairy and working with the dairy, a veterinarian came out, and I would help him in vaccinating and testing calves while testing cows. And I thought, I loved working with the livestock, but I didn't see anybody making money working for someone else's livestock. I thought, the only way I can make a good living with livestock is as a veterinarian. So that's what I decided in the last of the school year, that senior year. So Aunt Lenora and Grandma Weber and Mother and I drove down to Las Cruces, New Mexico to get me set up in New Mexico A&M, and we actually went to Old Mexico. It was Las Cruces was only about 40 miles from El Paso, and that was right across the border from Juarez. So we went down there. They wanted to see Old Mexico, so we drove. I was absolutely amazed. They let me drive.
And this is after graduation?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
This is getting ready to enroll into university. And so as we coming back across the bridge, Grandma said, "Are we finally back in the U.S.?" And they had all my gear and got me set up in New Mexico A&M, and there was a little college dorm that I was in, and then one guy that was in the dorm, he and I became friends, and we moved into an apartment off campus. There were 3 of us in one apartment, and one time he had gotten a box of a carton of little packages of grape nuts, and that was about all we had to eat at one time. It was
Did you even have milk for the grape nuts?
Yeah, we were able to buy milk. And then one night the Harlem Globetrotters were played at the university, and we were able to get in and watch them. And it seems like we had a beer before we went, and when we got back, I bought more beer, and somebody bought some whiskey, Four Roses, I think it was.
Ugh.
And I was always the first to drop out. I would decide I could spend so much money, I could lose so much money, that was it. I never was a successful gambler. And so I was drinking some beer while they were playing, and then somebody they broke up playing poker, and they handed me the bottle of whiskey and says, "Here, Weber, have a drink." So I took a big, and then I think it was Bob Marker, my buddy. He said, "Weber, you didn't drink anything. You tongued the bottle." "Well, I'll show you." I was severely poisoned. I was going crazy, and then I was starting to feel sick, and the carton of the beer carton, all the cans of the carton was in, they cut a notch and laid me on that, and I could puke on one side and then roll over and puke on the other side.
God.
And I woke up the next morning feeling like I was freezing. I had puked in the bed. I had pooped in the bed. It was terrible, absolutely terrible. I got up, I rolled the sheets up, walked out and threw them out the door. and took a bath, and then went and laid down to bed. Oh, that next morning I was supposed to go take a final exam in chemistry, and I missed that completely. So I went and talked to the professor, and he agreed to let me take a makeup exam.
Oh, you luck out.
And I passed that, and graduated from all my classes. And
did you do well in school?
Fairly well, you know. I had a job working in the livestock barn, feeding livestock, mainly cleaning pens. And I did that every afternoon practically. And I don't know, got 50, 75 cents an hour. But that was how I made some money, working, taking care of livestock. That seemed to be what I liked to do. And I went back to Roswell, and then started working on the dairy farm, irrigating.
Where your mother was still in the...
Mother was still working there, and there was a man working there on the dairy farm that he was courting my mother, and they eventually got married.
What was his name?
No, I can't say it. I can't remember any names.
Okay.
Anyhow, I was doing irrigation, and the water would come running down the ditch, and they had a tarpaulin nailed to a 2x4, and that would hold the water. You put it down and hold the water, and then you would dig out openings in the ditch to water 16 rows. And you have to wait and let it roll down. And that was a 12-hour shift at night. So I learned that for some reason the way the cultivators were set, one row would run faster than the others. So I would go down at the end of the rows, lay down and lay my hand out in that row that was running fastest, and now I could go to sleep. And then when my hand got wet and cold, I knew it was time to get up. And the important thing was that if too much water came out, and it would pool up at the end, that was called tailwater, and that was not good. So you had to get up there and you had two tarps, so we set another second tarp and get it all set, then dig more, they call them eyes, to let the water into the next set. And I don't remember how long it would take to run one down, but anyhow, that you just keep working to get all the cotton irrigated. Then when you got done, you went back and filled in all those notches in the ditch that you'd opened up to irrigate. You had to get all those filled in again.
And it was just you, or there was multiple?
Just there was only a couple of us doing irrigating. One of them was Clardy's nephew, and Jim Higdon, and he was going to New Mexico, going to college. And I got to talking to Mother and said, you know, there's only 19 veterinary colleges, veterinary schools in the U.S.
So would you graduate, when you graduated from college, you graduated with a bachelor's in something?
Not yet.
Oh, okay, you haven't.
Because I just finished 1 year at New Mexico A&M.
Okay.
Then Mom and I talked, and I said, about the only chance of getting into vet school is if you're a resident of the state. So that would mean we'd have to move. We just arbitrarily selected Oklahoma State as the one we were going to try, move to Oklahoma. What little I read about it seemed like a good choice. And that was the closest one to where we were living. And when I was showing cattle in the fair, there was a man there that was showing cattle and hogs. And I was able to buy a pig from him, a young pig, with the prize money that the cows won. When they won a ribbon, they got some prize money. And Claudia said, you can keep that prize money. You can keep the ribbons. I still have the ribbons somewhere.
Wow.
And so out of that prize money, I bought a pig. I thought, we'll raise pigs maybe. So I was able to take it out, and they had big hay barns, and I was able to set up a pen by the hay barn and fed and watered that pig down there. And then I was able to get it bred, and she had a litter. And then we was going to move to Stillwater. And Bob, her husband then, Bob, and he had two boys, and they loaded all their goods up and one trailer and another trailer hauling the pigs, and they drove to Stillwater, Oklahoma. And you know, I again, you know, as I look back, I realize how strong and how careful she was. She found a place on the outskirts of town that had room to put some pigs, and got a job and started working before. And I spent the summer in Roswell living with Carl Clardy and his wife Jo, and working on the farm. And then,
what'd she get a job doing? Bookkeeping, or?
No, she was a clerk in a store, and then working as a concession stand in the theater.
No, in Stillwell, when you moved to...
In Stillwater.
Oh, Stillwater.
Yeah. And so we got moved into Stillwater, and then she and Bob Cook, I think was his name now, it comes right, they got divorced. They didn't work. He was always jealous. Sure, she was cheating on him.
Wow.
I guess that's because he figured that's what he'd do.
Yeah.
And so they split up, and I remember Aunt Lenore and Grandma really didn't care much for Bob Cook. he was he was he was not very well educated and kind of coarse individual. But anyhow,
Now, when you say grandma, it's your father's mother.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So she was close with your mother?
Yeah. And see, the grandparents were Muzzy and Grandma.
Oh, okay.
That by those names. And so I enrolled in college there. It was Oklahoma A&M, and I applied for vet school, and I had to go to a third year to get grades up and get the credits to be eligible for vet school. And of course, I was always trying to work in the afternoon, and I didn't get selected for vet school. So I enrolled for a fourth year, maybe get a degree in agriculture.
Yeah.
And then before school started, I got a notice that someone else had dropped out, and I was eligible to get into vet school if I wanted to go. Oh, praise the Lord! And I was thank you. I wanted to go, so I got into vet school, and that was a 4-year course, and we had moved out on a farm, and I was raising pigs out there, and one time I had about 40 pigs that I was feeding to fatten up, and I actually was able to borrow some money from the bank so I could afford to buy grain and feed the hogs. And then I sold the pigs and paid the loan off, and then we moved in town so we'd be ready to start school, so I could start school. Mom was always planning and figuring. I know Jim said they were great believers in education, and they would do whatever it took to get us educated. And looking back, I realized how strong she was, keeping me going straight. And Lenora, she was furnishing the money for my tuition and books. Of course, back then, vet school was about 20 or 21 class hours. The classes were from 8 to 5 days a week, and 8 to noon on Saturdays. And
you had no time for anything else.
No. Well, I got a job at a little bakery to fry donuts in the morning. I started at 4 o'clock and worked till 7 because he was furnishing donuts to sororities and all different places around town. And so I was working frying donuts from 4 to 7. Then I had to go to school from 8 to 5. And then I got home. I needed to study for a couple hours. And I sat down to study and went to sleep. And the doctor of pathology had a serious talk with me. He said, "You're not going to make it this year the way you're going." So I had to drop out of the bakery and really progress. I got my grades up to where I was going okay, but that was it. It takes a lot to get through those type of schools. It's not only the classes but studying afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And so I in the senior year whatever state you wanted to try to work in, you had to get your veterinary license. That means taking a state board. For some reason, I thought I wanted to go back to Nebraska, where I'd grown up, and I and another man went up to take the state board in Nebraska, and we both passed. And I think it was then, while I was up there to take the state board, that I went to visit Humboldt, Nebraska. And there was an old veterinarian there, retired. They didn't have a veterinarian in that area. And I could have gone to work for 2 veterinarians in Auburn, Nebraska, and I decided I had to get out and start my own practice, which was dumb. And I should have. I didn't know enough to practice veterinary medicine. You learn, seem like you learn all the stuff, but you don't learn how to really do it. And so it was quite a difficult learning. We graduated, and then what little stuff we had, we were living in an apartment over a garage. Betty and I,
So you'd already met her.
Were
you married?
I had to take a course in entomology on bugs. And there was a man had a business in Pecos, Texas. And he had graduated from Oklahoma State, and he came up to hire people to help work on his business. The cotton down there, some men were spraying their cotton once a week with poison to control the insects, the boll weevils, those type of things. That cost $2.40 an acre. And if they had 500 or 1,000 acres, that's a big chunk of change. If he could save them one spraying, he was charging, I think, 75 cents an acre. They'd more than pay for his services. And he had like 30,000 acres under contract. And so he hired about 5 guys and divided it up so you do 1,000 or 2,000 acres every day.
What, spraying?
No, you check them. You go out and inspect. You actually did count. You take 100 plants and shake it on paper and see how many insects you got and what kind they got. And the bollworms would lay eggs right on the very top of the plant. And then you'd see little white eggs all around. As those eggs hatch, then they turn black with a little worm in them. If you dusted that plant then, they were easily killed.
Mm-hmm.
If you waited till they really went through several stages, it's really difficult. You had to spray them. So he always had them doing dusting instead of spraying, and dusting was a lot cheaper. And so that was what I did.
That's after college?
That was during college.
During college.
During college. And it was, I never did learn to handle money. So I didn't save that much because we were having too much fun. And so we went. And I had to go to Army Reserve Camp in Colorado Springs, Fort Carson. When I told the man I had to leave before my time was up, he was really aggravated. If I'd known you wasn't going to be here the whole time, I wouldn't have hired you. So I was driving. I had Mom had let me drive our car down there to do that, and she was working and walking. She was constantly sacrificing to make sure that I got where I needed to go.
Yeah.
And that car started developing problems, and I bought another car, and that was, I think I drove down a 51 Chevy, and ended up trading up to a 52 Chevy, used car lot. And so driving from Pecos on up to, I was planning to visit Lenore at Las Cruces, or at Albuquerque, and then right on up to, and so going up on those high lonesome winds, I got going too fast and threw a rod under the motor. Had to get towed in to a garage and called Lenora, and she came down and picked me up, and left the car at the garage to be repaired, a new motor. And then I was talking to Nora, well, I guess I better drop out of school. I've wasted too much money. She said, no, let's keep on working. You got to keep going. Okay.
Oh.
So I got on the bus up to the Army camp and went through Army Reserve camp, summer camp, for 2 weeks.
And they paid you for that?
Yeah. That was regular Army there for 2 weeks, and then we went back down to Albuquerque, and Lenore took me down to pick my car up, and I drive back to Stillwater, and that all happened just before I got in vet school.
Wow.
So there we go.
Well, let's take a break. We'll start with you. You immediately said you went to Nebraska, got your degree, you were looking at a business, Army business, and you said, we moved into an apartment. And I said, we?
Yeah. I didn't bring my personal life up to date. The man that I was rooming with down in Pecos, Texas for that entomology service was Donnie Lovelace, and he was a woman chaser. And so we got back to Stillwater and get in school, and I was already in vet school when I did that. And so this one woman he wanted to date with, he arranged a blind date with her roommate, Betty Thurman. And that's how Betty and I met. And then the relationship continued to develop, and a lot of courting in the car.
Where'd you go to the first date?
I have no idea. That's been so long ago and far away that I could never remember where I went on the first date. And I remember that we ended up going out and parking in a car somewhere and necking in the car.
Piece these together.
So we got pretty serious, heavy courting, and the women's dormitories, they required all the women to be checked in by, I think, 11 o'clock or something like that. And one time about midnight, somebody found us. So she went in, and then, you know, I can't remember how much time it was, but then she said, "I've missed a period. I think I'm pregnant." I said, "Well, then I guess we better get married." "Well, do you love me? Do you just want to marry me because I'm pregnant?" "Oh, no, that's okay." And so we arranged that. Her roommate was the best maid, and my good friend Bob Whitney, and that got me into the AGR fraternity, and we were studying together all the time for vet school. So he was my best man, and there's a picture of the four of us all smiling and dressed up in suits and ties.
Where did you go to get married?
Pawnee City, or Pawnee, Oklahoma, I think it was. I can't remember now. But then I'd tell my mother, my mother she almost seemed unflappable. She just, okay, if that's what and
Had she met Betty till yet?
I can't remember whether they have or not.
Okay.
But then we had to go down and tell her parents. Well, I had been down there once or twice before, and they were amazed. They didn't know anyone could eat that much. The only person I've seen since then was Josh Cutler could out-eat me when at the same stage. So anyway, Leslie Thurman had to take a sleeping pill that night. And then Moyna had to get organized and have a reception out at the country club. And thank heaven somebody thought about contacting my mother and bringing her down. I'm pretty clueless about looking after people and doing things like that. So she was there at the reception and seemed quite happy and was well received. And we had a fortune in silver as gifts. Coffee, tea, silverware. I don't know. It was huge. And then she was working on her bachelor's degree in psychology, and then they suggested that veterinary students should have a bachelor degree in veterinary science. So if we decided I wanted to get advanced degrees, that later on I would have the basis to go do that. So we both graduated together at the same time at Oklahoma A&M. And then after that, the whole institution decided that they can't be a college, they got to be a university. And all the various subjects are colleges. You got the College of Agriculture, College of Veterinary Medicine, all that. So they had to become a university. So when I graduated from Oklahoma State University.
Okay.
And which all of that doesn't mean anything, but it's information about me.
Yeah.
And I had talked about going up to Nebraska to take the state board exam. I sometimes make stupid decisions on impulse. I could have gone to work for a veterinarian in Shawnee. I didn't think that'd be a good idea. Too much close family there.
Yeah.
So went up to Nebraska and then learned about Humboldt, an old retired veterinarian there. There was no veterinarian in Humboldt at the time, I thought, boy, this is a great place. I could have gone to work for 2 veterinarians up in Auburn, Nebraska. And then I could have learned enough to run a practice. But no, I had to get out. You don't learn enough in vet school to do a practice.
Yeah.
And you learn to treat some diseases. That's about all. Anyhow.
Did Betty get upset by this, going to Nebraska, leaving her family?
It didn't seem to. She was not that crazy about being close to her mother.
Oh.
And what little we had, we could put in a U-Haul trailer.
Yeah.
And Leck Thurman arranged for me to buy a 1959 Chevy, brand new.
Wow.
And so we got into Humboldt and found a partially furnished house, a little place that we could rent. And somehow the banker heard about it and asked me in and asked me about whether I needed any money. And I said, well, I don't have any. So it seemed like he loaned me $500 or $600 just to help me get the business started. And it's amazing. And of course, all the veterinary companies, they would furnish you with everything you needed on credit. So I had everything I need to run a practice, I thought. And so I was practicing out of that house. There was a little back porch that I could use to treat animals, or dogs and cats. And
but you didn't go in it for treating dogs and cats.
Well, I was just whatever came in.
Yeah.
And that guy brought in a dog. It was a Cocker Spaniel that had got caught with a mower when they were mowing hay. And I was really, and he crawled under the house, and it took him a while to get him out. And so it'd been a while. So trying to clean that up and sew it up. I think he survived okay. But
so at that point, though, you said Betty said she'd missed her, but she wasn't pregnant.
That's right.
So you had no children at this point.
No, but during the last year, she decided when she wanted to have a baby. So she decided there for this certain period of time we had to have sex every day. Oh man, I was happy.
Okay.
Okay, I can do that. So that ended up with her being pregnant and having the baby then in Humboldt. But the nearest hospital was up in Auburn Hospital. So Debbie was born in Auburn Hospital.
Okay.
And of course, in those days, the husband was not allowed in the delivery room. So I was standing outside and I saw him bring this little red scrumpy thing through. And, well, what did it look like? Well, yeah, kind of looked like there was one man actor that I kind of remember. I was not a good person like that. Oh, it's my baby, and I just love it. She looks wonderful. No, she didn't look that good. So, anyhow, then my mother had ovarian cancer, and so my Uncle Jim and I and Betty, we all drove to Albuquerque and was able to talk to doctors, and he was impressed with my knowledge of cancer.
Yeah.
And and I've always felt like she knew she had problems, but she didn't want to do anything about it till she knew I was graduated in practice. I always believed that. But they had surgery, but it had been grown, spread, and so.
Where was she living at that time?
But my mother was living in Albuquerque. She had been working in a girls' school, and so Lenora arranged to get her up to Auburn, and she was with my grandmother Muzzy, and I didn't go up and visit her as much as I should. But I was busy with trying to do my practice, and that first winter in Humboldt, we had snow at one time, 3 foot out there in the backyard, trying to dig a path out there so the dogs could go out and do their job.
Oh, you had dachshunds?
Yeah, she brought the Chihuahua and the dachshund.
Okay.
Pokey and Missy, I think they were. And that was her decision, and she got that. Then we had moved to another house that belonged to a family there in Humboldt. And it was a pretty decent house. And we were going along, then all of a sudden the two families got into a big argument. And the family I was renting from, their son or whoever was renting from this other family, and they said he had to get out. So he said, well, you're going to have to get out so he can move into that house. And I said, well, the hell with it, I just moved to Auburn.
Yeah.
And so I moved to Auburn, and the two veterinarians in Auburn were very supportive. They had a fair amount of livestock that needed blood testing and dehorning and the rough work, which I didn't mind doing. So I did that.
You have David by the time you got to Auburn, or was?
No, it was after we got to Auburn. And then we Betty was pregnant again, and I got a job with the government testing cattle for brucellosis and tuberculosis. And so I had about 5 or 6 counties I had to travel over. I had a government car furnished, and I had to go out and talk to the owners and line up the testing, and then go back out and do the testing and what have you. And then it was going on. We actually bought a little house there in Auburn and had the 2 children, and then I don't remember how it is, but there was a veterinarian in Syracuse that wanted someone to work with him. And I thought, I had to understand it would be working towards a partnership. And so he wasn't up on some of the current things like doing a spinal to injecting procaine, into the vertebrae so they no longer strain, and for doing cleaning and what have you, he didn't know how to do that. So I was doing that, bringing in some new things. And the story I like to tell is that he had a little house there that was for his office, and had like a front room and then
side room and a back room, and the back room had medicines and what have you. And the one little side room was for if someone brought a dog or cat in. And he had a leather coat hanging in that room. And a guy called, he wanted to have his cat castrated. Well, actually, at that time, there were not good anesthetics for cat. They were pretty touchy. If you try to use the ones using on dogs, they might live and they might not. So they brought the cat in, and the coat was for castrating cat. Stuff him up the sleeve, and he couldn't bite or scratch or do anything, and then you castrate him.
No anesthetic.
No. I did try to sterilize the scrotum before you cut onto it. And so several days later, he came by and said, I think there's some drainage or something in this cat. Did you look at it again? Sure. I'm going to be here for a little while. I got to go out on calls. That was most of the business going out to the farms and treating animals on the farm. They didn't have any facilities to bring an animal in, livestock. And I said, I'll be here in a little while. If you bring him down, we'll take a look at him. He never showed up, so I went on calls, and of course, a little town of 1,500, well, you see everybody at some time or other. And I saw him in town, and I said, well, you never brought that cat down. He said, well, actually, I did. But when I brought the cat down, when I stopped in front of the building, that cat went crazy, and I couldn't get him. He didn't want to come in there anymore. He got all better by himself. So anyway, that was, and we were renting a house there in Syracuse, and then we had two more children there in Syracuse.
Two more,
and we there was a house up on the highway that I was trying to buy, and I talked a couple of farmers into help get me into those.
Okay.
And I gave them really good deals on treatment of their animals. And so that was a big house where you kind of grew up in there in Syracuse. It was 2-story. It had actually been built by a man that owned a lumber company. So he put in great, good wood into everything.
But wasn't that destroyed by a tornado, or was just the roof ripped off?
I have no idea. Nothing. Well, we lived there.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, so then I was practicing. It had 5 bedrooms, so there was a bedroom by the front door, and I turned that into an office.
Oh.
And Betty put up curtains in there, got it fixed. And one time a guy brought in the cat distemper that you could vaccinate for them, and they would, it was pretty destructive on the cat population. So guy said, I've got some cats, I want to get vaccinated. And bring them in. Okay, well, it'll be $3 a head for vaccinating the cats. He had them in a fruit basket with the lid on the fruit basket. And when he was going to try to get one out, you had an explosion of cats. They were crawling up the curtains, and they were just going everywhere. Fortunately, I had the office door closed, so that they couldn't get out of the office. And we managed to get each one vaccinated and back in the basket again.
What a nightmare.
Then a man that ran a grocery store, I think it was, his wife had kind of been feeding a couple of cats, and he wanted to get them vaccinated. And so, being my usual careless person, he brought the cat up to my front door, and I was, "Hi!" The cat went, "Wow!" Bit him and took off, and the cat bite made him sick, and he finally got well, and he came back, and we tried again and got the cat vaccinated, but they were just partially wild cats. I agreed to let her feed them, and so things like that. And then there was the Dairy Cream down at the bottom of the hill. And we could go down to get ice cream and watch the bug scream.
Oh.
Zip, watch the big screen zap the bugs for entertainment.
Entertainment?
Yeah.
But no cost whatsoever.
No cost whatsoever. And Betty liked to go up to Lincoln to do shopping. We lived in a big house, and I was telling about my experiences of treating cats in that office. And Betty would love to go shopping up in Lincoln. And she said, "I'll be back at a certain time." I knew she wouldn't be. Once you get up there, you never. And then when she finally got back, "Were you worried about me?" "No, I wasn't." "Well, if you loved me, you would have been worried about me."
Did she leave you with the kids?
Uh-huh. And so that was, but the kids, before Donna and Deanna were born, Debbie and David kind of ran wild around that property, and they had a wading pool out in back they could play in, and before they ate breakfast, and so she sent them out to play in the wading pool, and then told them to leave their underpants there by the door, and get them dressed when they came in. They left their underpants by the door and then went running out in the front yard. And they were running up and down the sidewalk, stark naked. And there was one man that sold, I forget, it was a popular brand of stuff that he could sell from door to door. And he saw him running, he stopped and walked to one door and another one, and he gave up and left. And they came in, and Betty never knew the difference till someone told her later. And then, of course, when you and Donna on the wading pool, we had dachshund puppies, and Donna was trying to teach one to swim. It didn't survive.
It wasn't swimming.
So anyway, and I remember bringing a snake home just for fun.
For fun?
Yeah.
Hopefully it wasn't poisonous.
No, there really weren't hardly any poisonous snakes in Nebraska.
Yeah.
And so I just thought it would help them not be frightened to even touch a snake. You know.
Did the snake live? Or did we teach it to swim?
I don't remember now. Anyway, then I opened an office downtown and worked out of that for a while. Then I got a job. I applied for a government job in Duncan, Oklahoma. And so I sold the house there in Syracuse. And that was the famous story of the Davidsons were a family that our kids always played with. They were close. And they were helping get packed and get things going. And I had a Pontiac station wagon, and Glenn Davidson, I didn't realize it till I was on the road that he'd taken, I think, shoe polish and wrote on the back window, "Just divorced." And Betty said, "You take the kids and go on, I'll finish cleaning the house." So, okay, so I headed off down the road, and someone come by, see 4 kids in the car and "Just divorced" in the back window. Oh, that's, poor. They stopped on the interstate to go in to eat, and they just had so much sympathy.
People were so nice to you.
And when we got down into Duncan, the government was going to move all my household goods, and we could stay at a motel at their expense until we got moved in, which was standard. But when we got in there, Betty said, "You got to wash that back window." Oh, okay. So we moved into, I bought that house in Duncan. It was a 4-bedroom home when the family room had been, the double garage had been remodeled into a family room. And I think I paid $12,000 for that house.
That was a nice house.
So I had a little money out of that house in Syracuse to make the down payment on that house, and so we got started there, and it was only about a mile up that road to the packing plant where I was working. So we had some wonderful times there in Duncan. And then I got the job in Clovis. And that one I didn't even apply for. The regional office called up, the secretary in charge of the regional office says, "Wayne, I had really good ratings and a lot of people spoke good about me. We're going to have an opening in Clovis for a GS-12. That would be a promotion for me. Do you want that job?" "Yeah." "Okay, you'll have it."
And that was Swift Packing Plant? Or?
Yeah, that was Swift Packing Plant. And so we went up there, and they would pay for a house hunting trip. So we went up there and looking and decided on a house at 2309 Duckworth. And on the way back, Betty was really upset about our moving, and I don't think she was happy about it. "And this is what you want to do?" I said, "If it's going to upset you, we can just not go." "No, you're right," I said. So anyway, I moved to Clovis, and then we started in the Methodist church there, and Clyde Stanfield, the pastor, I got good friends with him, and he and I started jogging together, and it was really good. And then Betty got that assignment in Las Vegas, New Mexico, at that state hospital.
Oh.
She was already started on her master's degree in psychology and that little university down south. And so she took that, and I arranged for a high school girl to come in and get the kids up and off to school. And I had to start at 5:30 and got off at 2:30, and pick up the kids at school and down in Indiana. And I was started in the YMCA, and they had classes there for, what was it?
Swimming, and
Yeah,
we did gymnastics.
So that kept them occupied while I worked out at the YMCA, and so it was. And I can't remember. It seemed like Betty was up there for 5 or 6 weeks. I can't remember how long now, but I know that she never called, never said, never wanted to talk to the kids, never called, and somehow she was having an affair and went to Albuquerque, and Lenora learned about it.
Really?
Yes, but Lenora, she's not one to squeal or tell her, if it's problems, you'll have to figure it out yourself.
Yeah.
So when she came back, she told me, well, I had an affair. I said, and I didn't go into detail, but I'd had several myself already while she was gone. And I said, well, I can forgive you. Well, I can't. I can't forgive myself. And so everything kind of went sour after that. And we had a lay witness mission at our church. Laymen coming into the church and holding a revival at our church. And when they walked in, the only thing they said was, God loves you and I love you. And that was the theme of the whole revival. And after that, at the end of that weekend, everybody was on an emotional high, really. And that next Sunday, the people that didn't come to the lay witness mission couldn't understand why everybody was so hyped inside. Clyde had a hard time keeping the church stabilized through that. Really? Because it was almost enough, could have split the church up. And so and Clyde asked me to be chairman of that whole affair, and I agreed, and so finally got to the point that I knew it. Betty and I were living in the same house, sleeping in the same bed, but never having any contact, except maybe a little bit on the weekend. Otherwise, we never talked to each other. And it was.
I remember the writing on the mirrors.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
Oh, we go ahead and read them.
Okay. Anyway, I was out jogging, and I will go back to that lay witness mission. That's the first time that I understood that when I was praying, I was talking to the Lord. All the time before that, I felt like I was just talking to myself. And so I went jogging out in the prairie trying to figure out what I was going to do out. And I stopped and I was agonizing, talking to the Lord and saying, I don't know, what should I do, Lord? What's going to happen? I don't know. And he never spoke to me, but all of a sudden I felt a great feeling of peace, that whatever happened, it would be okay. So it was shortly after that I called. I had applied for a job in Bend, Oregon, and they called me and said I was accepted for that job in Bend. When can you be there? I can come tomorrow. No, we got to get everything lined up. So that went up and was there. Had the job was a circuit supervisor, and they had 6 circuits with supervisors that had certain plants and areas. And so the area supervisor, old Dr. Moody, I had to travel with every circuit supervisor and see how they did things and how to handle problems. And when I finished that, then I went over to Bend to see about getting a house to live in. And I was staying at that motel, Riverside, and I went down to the manager and said, any place I could go to go dancing, I'm allowed to dance? He said, well, Tony's Pocatoro has a band and a dance floor. So I went down there, and there was this little blonde, black-haired gal that her foot was bouncing to the music, and I asked her to dance, and we danced for 5 hours.
Wow.
And then I asked her to go back home with me. She said, okay.
But you were still in the hotel. You didn't have a house.
I was still in the motel.
Yeah, you didn't have anybody with you, did you? Did you just come up to find a place?
Huh?
You hadn't moved all your stuff up yet, have you?
No, there was nothing. No.
Okay.
And so we, our whole relationship started with adultery, and I never really even considered that at the time.
Was she married at the time?
No, she was living with Paul.
Oh, okay, but she wasn't married to Paul.
No.
Okay.
She never did marry Paul.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
No. And she had been working for this guy that had a used car lot, and she got pregnant by him, and that's how Jerry.
Right.
She named Jerry after him. And so she came over with another woman that wanted to find a guy she was interested in, and somehow she got in contact and she picked Joe up to take her back home.
Oh.
And then I found that house that we were living in. I bought that house then. It was what they call a spec house by a construction company that, to build it to sell.
Oh, okay.
On speculation. And he went broke.
Oh, really?
And so the house was wanting to sell to get rid of it. So I got a really good deal of it.
On 1652 Wells Acres Road.
Yep.
In Bend, Oregon.
Yeah. And I forget, very minimal down payment. I didn't have a lot of money, but I managed to work it out. All the time I was traveling, I was able to save travel money. And so I went, flew back to Clovis, and I had talked with Betty about, I thought all 4 kids should stay together, and her reply was, I can't handle 4 kids by myself, but I won't give up the 2 little girls.
Wow.
And at one time, Donna said, if you and Mom break up, which kids will you get? Donna asked that.
Wow.
I thought, well, if she can look at it that way, maybe they'll get by okay.
Yeah.
So I said, okay. And we decided what furniture I could have. They had a lot of furniture in that big house in Clovis.
Yeah.
So I got part of the furniture. And the moving company come by and picked it up and brought it up to Bend. So It's still going.
Okay, just checking.
And so that's how they got to Bend. And
But you drove
huh?
all the way from Clovis to Bend
Yeah.
with all that stuff, and Debbie and David
And there was a woman there that wanted to go out to California. She wanted to go with me. I think she was thinking she could get in, you know.
where'd she come from?
There in Clovis.
Was she from the church? Did you?
Oh no. I can't remember now. How
Did
we
she
got-
ride with you guys?
Yeah.
Oh, how awkward.
Well, she drove her car
Uh.
till it broke down in like in Vegas, and she was riding with us. And I had that little trailer that had all our stuff in it,
And how were Debbie and David taking it as you were?
they seemed to say, well, you know, they thought she was going to be like a house taker, caretaker.
But they took the whole moving pretty well.
Yeah.
Wow.
We stopped in Las Vegas. Betty had talked about going up and having dinner at this hotel, and so I stopped there. And you go up to the top and they had Chinese and steak. I forget. No, ribs. Chinese. You know, it was prime rib.
Oh yeah.
But I said, we'll do the rib. They said, yeah, I hate ribs. And then when he got the prime rib, oh, I like this.
You'd never had it that way.
Never had that, you know, cooked just perfect.
It was usually burned.
Yes. So that was then coming north on Highway 97. It was snow and ice, and pulling that trailer, that big old Oldsmobile. And of course, you know, I was never a cautious person. It started slipping around at times, but we just kept going. And we got back into that same motel that I'd been in, and they had a covered swimming pool.
Oh, nice.
A completely covered swimming pool. And the kids loved that.
Yeah.
And then finally was able to get into the house by about November, by Thanksgiving, I think it was. And the woman that had come with me, she went back down, and her son-in-law could come over, get the car started, and she went back home.
Oh, she went back to New Mexico?
Yeah. Yeah. And while flying back to Clovis, I met a woman in Dallas airport, and we talked and talked and talked, and next thing I knew, she called. She was flying in.
To Bend?
Uh-huh.
Wow. You just had women everywhere.
Yeah. When I first, it was Labor Day when I first got to Salem. I flew into Salem, and I went across the street to this place that had a band and dancing, and this one woman, I was dancing with her, and we were having a great time. She was there with another guy that was playing the piano for a horse show and at the fairgrounds. So she said, well, why don't you come down? And so they picked me up, took me down there to the horse show. And then there was a restaurant called Prime Rib.
Huh.
We went out there, and they had prime rib in a cart that they sliced it at your table.
Wow.
And however you wanted it. And it was really delicious. So then they were going back to Portland on Sunday. And so I went back to my room, and later on, someone knocked on the door, and it was her. So she came to spend the evening with me.
You never saw that coming from when you were in high school to that. Like
Oh,
women,
no.
before you could barely get them, now they're just throwing themselves.
Yeah. And women would want to spend the weekend with me at Bend. And they didn't seem to mind sleeping in that bunk bed. Oh, it was terrible.
Tiny little bed.
And it took me quite a while to realize that adultery is something that God hates. And I was not really thinking about that.
Well, you were still married to Betty, right? You
Yes.
hadn't been divorced yet.
No,
Oh, yeah.
no. And then Joe moved over to Bend. She had a friend there doing hair.
Did you keep in contact with her, or how did you connect back up with her?
She connected back up with me.
Oh, so she of course you did.
And so we renewed our relationship. And then for some reason she left and went up to the Dalles. She had two men that she had been friends with her family way back.
Oh, I thought they were uncles.
No,
Okay.
they were not related to the
Okay.
family at all. But she and Jerry were staying with them, and she was working as a bar and getting by okay. Then Paul found out where she was. He came up, had a pistol, and made her go home with him. And Jerry was not happy till I got back there, and there's his school and friends, everything. That's where he was happy.
Yeah.
And so I finally wrote Joe a goodbye letter, and then I think that's what made her decide. She talked to Jerry about moving, and he said, "No, Mom, I really love living here. I'm happy here, and you can come visit me anytime you want."
Wow.
But she turned custody over to Paul.
And he must have been pretty young, like elementary school or something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
he
yeah.
was young.
And she was trying to treat him like an adult.
Yeah.
And it made her life miserable and his life miserable.
Yeah.
Because Paul was not about to give up. So she came over, and that's when I applied for divorce. And and the divorce was filed there in Bend, and Betty learned about it when the police came out to deliver the papers.
Oh.
And she was really upset. So anyway, I never had guts enough to tell her to face that I couldn't stand to live with her.
Yeah.
That was my problem. But
Well, you had said that you had brought back Debbie and David
yeah,
to visit for the summer.
yeah. No, I didn't bring David. There was another woman that picked him up and took him with her. And she stopped by to see Betty, and told Betty I was tied up with Joe, and then she took David on down to Houston with her.
Who was this?
She was a secretary in our office.
Oh, okay.
She was another one that would come over on the weekends.
So she was unhappy.
Yes. When I told her, "I don't love you," and
Yeah. So she got revenge.
yes.
So you took Debbie down,
Yes,
and we were in.
well, I was taking you and Donna back to Yatesville.
Okay.
And walked in, and she was laying on the floor talking to a friend because we had no furniture in the living room, laying there by the fireplace.
Yeah.
And she hadn't talked to Debbie in over a year. Hadn't even talked to her. And Debbie walked in, and Debbie said, "Oh, hi," And I thought, I could never live with that woman.
Yeah.
But I didn't have guts enough to tell that to her face.
But you already knew about the divorce papers.
No, I hadn't.
Oh, you did it when you went back. Okay.
Yes. When Joe moved in with me, that's when and so that started, and Joe and I, for 20 years, all the different jobs that I had, moving, everywhere I was trying to find a church that I could go to that had meaning to it. And Joe had no interest in church. Sunday was her day to sleep in. And then, as I've told everybody, when she had driven from Austin to Salem in that big truck, she took Mildred and her mother to Salem Heights Church, and one sermon changed her life. She became a believer. She called me that day and said, "Webb, if you could find a church in Austin like Salem Heights, I'd go in a heartbeat." And we found one, and we went till I retired and moved back to Salem. Because that was our agreement. She'd go wherever the job took me till I retired, and I'd take her back to Salem.
Yeah.
And when she took Jerry back to Salem, Mildred went with her, and her assistant manager went with her. There were four, and Jerry. There were four people. Jerry had that little Honda that he bought for me, and Joe had the Pontiac station wagon, and they had the other gear. All that Jerry would take was back in those two cars.
That wasn't in Austin. That was in
That was
Virginia.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, because you guys went from Virginia. So you, because I was trying to think of the time-wise. I think you jumped time-wise. So you retired from Austin, but that was quite some time before you were in Bend, and then you got the job in D.C.
Yes. And I'd applied for jobs, but one of the secretaries' office said, "You don't get any good." I had treated the assistant area supervisor with less than respect. And then they made him the boss.
Oh.
And my boss down in Clovis says, "Wayne, be nice to everybody. You never know where you're going to meet them on the way up or on the way down."
Yeah.
And I didn't listen to him properly. Anyhow, and I didn't think I was ever going to get the job. And then the man that ran the residue division in Washington, D.C. called the regional office of veterinarian down there and asked who they would recommend for a job up here. And he recommended me.
Wow.
So the guy never announced the job. He just called me and asked me if I wanted the job. And I said, yeah. And and again, that I was making decisions without even talking to Joe about it. But she never complained, never said, "We're moving." Okay, I'm throwing stuff away.
All that stuff you've been holding on to, gone.
Yeah. And
but by that time, Donna and I had moved in with you guys in Bend, so it was all of us moving out to DC. Was that the job that you had at USDA or with the
at USDA?
Okay, so that wasn't when you had you had to work for Senator, didn't you?
That was while I was working in USDA. That was a leadership development role to go and work for someone in Congress or whatever Senate, get some experience with government, knowing how things work.
Okay.
So that came out just out of nowhere. I didn't apply for it. It just they nominated me to go on it.
Okay, because we were in Bowie at that time, and you had that big house in Bowie that we lived on the corner.
Yeah. No, that was after when we were living in that big house in Bowie. That's when I got the job in Washington, in Australia.
Oh yeah.
Moved from there to Australia, and when they came back, I was in the export coordination division, and I just switched one job after another.
Yeah.
That had no relationship, and I loved it. It was fun because it was always something new. It was a challenge, and it was then when what was the town and we had that house with about 5 bedrooms. You were
in Sterling.
Sterling.
Yes, because you came back from Australia, you went to Herndon,
Yeah.
and that's where Jerry was. Because Jerry must have moved in somewhere about there, because he wasn't with you in Australia. He visited in Australia.
Well, it was his second trip to Australia. The government, they called it educational travel.
Okay.
So that if the kids were going to school in the U.S., they could travel back to visit their parents.
Okay.
And the government paid for it. But when he got there, he finally told Joe, I don't want to go back. I can't stand it anymore. He said, okay, well, you won't go back. You're old enough. And then Paul threatened he was going to sue me for custodial interference. And so we called Joe's favorite lawyer there in Salem, and he got that resolved.
And then Jerry moved with you guys in Herndon, and that's where he graduated.
Yeah, Joe, like in September, flew back to the States with Jerry and got, what was that fancy area with the lake and all the apartments and...
Oh, in Reston. Yeah.
Yes. And she got an apartment in Reston, got him, and that's where he was eligible to go to that high school.
Yeah.
And then when I came, she bought that Honda at the same time. I have to say that she was remarkable. Yeah, okay, I'll take Jerry back. I'll buy a car and we'll get an apartment and we'll move in.
Yeah.
And it was a furnished apartment.
Yeah, I remember where it's at, downtown in Reston.
Then after I came back, we had all the furniture moved back and we rented that place in Reston, but in Herndon.
Herndon.
Yeah, too much moving.
Yeah, that was a lot. Because that was like from Reston to Herndon to Sterling.
Yes.
And then you bought the place in Sterling.
I didn't buy it, just rented it.
Oh, okay. So you just moved out of the one in Herndon and moved to Sterling? Why'd you move to Sterling?
The people that owned the house in Herndon was military, Navy or something. And they had the deal in the lease that if they had to come back, we'd have to move.
Okay.
So they were being transferred back into the Washington area.
Okay.
So we had to move out of Herndon, and we found that place in Sterling.
Okay.
and like I say, Joe just roll with the punch,
Yeah.
Whatever it is, that's what we'll do. And that's Joe furnished high school while we were living in Sterling.
Right.
And that's when he wanted to move back. And Joe was working in 7-Eleven.
7-Eleven.
And so they drove back to Salem to get Jerry moved to Salem. And he moved in with Debbie.
Everybody does.
And then Joe told Mildred, "Well, Mom, I'll take you home." She was living in Florida, up north of Tampa,
All right.
Tampa Bay. So Joe drove all the way down to the bottom of California and then all the way across to
Wow.
Florida, and then so I flew down and met her. She picked me up at Tampa Bay, and we went down just to have a day or two on the beach there.
Is that
Sarasota?
Did you already have the condo at Sarasota, or
No.
is that when you bought it?
I listened to the sales pitch and bought into it. And so I bought the timeshare there, and the two of us drove back up to Virginia. That was a 7,000-mile trip, and fortunately she had no car problems.
Yeah.
And the fun, like in February, you get some terrible snowstorms come through that area.
Yeah.
And we had, it seemed like 6 to 8 inches of snow on the ground there one time. And I still had tire chains from when we lived in Bend. So I slapped the tire chains on it so Jo could go anywhere she wanted. And her crew working, "I can't get to work." "That's all right. You get out on the porch and I'll pick you up." "Anybody can't make it, I'll get you."
Yeah.
So she was driving everywhere, going everywhere. And so then she got a job as trainer for the whole division. And finally she, driving over there was like 10 or 15 miles, but it'd be an hour drive.
Traffic.
And she said, "Weber, I hate living here." And I said, "Yeah, I hate living here too. I love working downtown DC, but I hate living there." That's when I applied for the job in Austin.
Oh, okay.
And past experiences with Vernon Conyer is what got me the job.
You're working for Vernon down there?
No, Vernon was head of the state meat inspection division, and the government decided he was doing away with state meat inspection, turn it all over to the federal.
Okay.
So they had to have a team of inspectors in to review all the plants and make a determination of what the staffing would be and what they were going to cost. And I happened to get the worst plant that he had, and I ripped him up one side and down the other. And he said, "You're all right." And so I was willing to do anything and say anything, but it created problems sometimes. And even when I was in Austin, I would get him into trouble by what he would say. But that's the way it was.
Yeah. Well, at least he knew you.
Yes, he knew me.
Maybe you want to take a break? You have to be thirsty.